You're listening to the official podcast of the Westside Vineyard in Los Angeles, a community of individuals and families connecting with God to change the world.
Again, want to extend a warm welcome, and I want to ask a question. How many here, you really enjoy being confronted? Being confronted by somebody who feels like there's issues. All right, John, no, I know you're kidding. Most of us don't like that. We feel a lot of somebody confronts us. It's not one of our top experiences. But let me ask you a different question. How many here believe that being confronted can be healthy and loving? Very different response. And I'm glad for that. I think it's good. Because this morning I want to invite us to welcome Jesus to confront us in the healthiest and most beautiful and most loving way, because he's after our good. As we continue this series, Conversations with Jesus, we're engaging some of the unique conversations that took place between he and others, knowing that some conversations in our lives, they're just polite conversations or they're just practical exchanges. But there are conversations that fundamentally change us because they confront our understanding. They transform our paradigms of who we are and life itself. And that changes us. And those with Jesus are very living conversations. What took place then takes place now as he continues to converse with us. So 3 weeks ago, we began by looking at how he first called lives to himself and how that calling engages us. And then last week, Joel shared about how the first sign of his life was to come, and they go to a wedding, these first followers with his mom, his family, and there, horrible social disgrace, this 3-day event, probably a week-long event as it would have been, they run out of wine, which is like the ultimate social disgrace. It will define their future. And Jesus meets them in what they would have had as a disgrace, and he turns that water into wine and creates something more beautiful and more extravagant, and all the symbols of that. And today we continue, and I invite you to turn with me in the Gospel of John as we see Jesus now make his way to Jerusalem. And you can follow with me on the screen or in the insert. And we read this. It says, after the wedding, he went to Capernaum for a few days with his mother, his brother, and his disciples. It was nearly time for the Jewish Passover celebration, so Jesus went to Jerusalem. In the temple area, he saw merchants selling cattle, sheep, and doves for sacrifices. He also saw dealers at tables exchanging foreign money. Jesus made a whip from some ropes and chased them all out of the temple. He drove out the sheep and cattle, scattered the money changers' coins over the floor, and turned over their tables. Then going over to the people who sold doves, he said to them, "Get these things out of here. Stop turning my Father's house into a marketplace." Then his disciples remembered this prophecy from the scriptures. Passion for God's house will consume me. But the Jewish leaders demanded, "What are you doing? If God gave you authority to do this, show us a miraculous sign to prove it." "All right," Jesus replied, "destroy this temple, and in 3 days I will raise it up." "What?" they exclaimed. "It has taken 46 years to build this temple, and you can rebuild it in 3 days?" But when Jesus said this temple, he meant his body. After he was raised from the dead, his disciples remembered he had said this, and they believed both the scriptures and what Jesus had said. Because of the miraculous signs Jesus did in Jerusalem at the Passover celebration, many began to trust him. But Jesus didn't trust them because he knew human nature. No one needed to tell him what mankind is really like. Kind of an intense exchange. Most of us, when you think of images of Jesus, we're all probably have seen more than one or two of Jesus holding a little lamb next to his chest, and stroking it, and that's what the Hallmark cards have. I have never seen a Hallmark card of this scene. It's just, this is a little on the other side of what we see. We think Jesus is kind of intense and what's coming out of him. But what's really taking place, I want to suggest, is Jesus is confronting what must be confronted, not only within the religious systems, but the people themselves. It's something of a real cleansing that is taking place. We have today, you can go online, you can see there's like a million ways. Just type in cleansing into Google search. You can have a liver cleansing, a colon cleansing, a smoothie cleansing. You can cleanse everything. You can do, there's just 1,000 ways to kind of clean the body. But, and many good, I'm sure, because they help what? Remove toxins, remove that which might be corrupting the body. But Jesus sees that we in ourselves, our souls need to be confronted, need to have a cleansing. And this is an essential part of what he's bringing, and it becomes clear as we even start into the very first words where it kind of gives the context. And we read those words, it says, it was nearly time for the Jewish Passover celebration, so Jesus went to Jerusalem. That's the context. Jesus is engaging the people as they begin to gather around what should be this time of remembering, this time of renewal, of restoration. That's what the Passover feast was about. It was remembering the time in which God had passed over the people when he had to bring judgment, when he is seeking to bring the freedom to his people, to break the powers of Egypt's slavery over them, and Pharaoh will not relinquish his powers. He brings plague after plague, and the final one is that of death. And there, the people could take the sacrificial lamb, and that blood would cover the doorposts, and he would pass over those whose homes did that. And so it's a profoundly sobering time of remembering that, God's provision. That's what they're going to. But part of that celebration included what they did with leaven in the house. Leaven is that which you put into to bread to make it rise. And so it's also called the Feast of Unleavened Bread, because they were to stop eating leaven and to go through the whole house and to clear away any leaven that could be found in the house. And you might think that's kind of strange. That was a huge part, he told them, because leaven represented what? Sin. It was kind of this symbolic idea that anything that gets in will be able to expand itself. So Paul would later say, even a little leaven, will kind of pollute or corrupt the whole body. So that's what leaven represented. So this is a time in which Jesus is going at a time into Jerusalem when everybody would be clearing out their homes and their lives. It was a time of that kind of restoration and of cleansing. And to that, we read, Jesus comes in. We see in that backdrop what he's coming to confront. And it says, in the temple area, he saw merchants selling cattle, sheep, and doves for sacrifices. He also saw dealers at tables exchanging foreign money. Now, this wouldn't have been something entirely odd to see, because the truth is Jerusalem would swell up with foreigners coming in. Jerusalem was where everybody those who had started to know God and have relationship would be coming to Jerusalem at that time from regions far and wide. Some estimate that Jerusalem had probably a regular population of maybe about 80,000 at this time. But during the festivals, there'd be 300 to 500,000. So you kind of imagine how intense and chaotic that would be. That's not like doubling, it's far more than even doubling the amount of people that would normally be in these streets and in these areas or coming to the temple. So it's just overwhelming. And many of them, they had two things that they were coming to do or perform. They would, if they could come, they would bring a sacrifice to kind of offer to God for their sins. And they would also pay the temple tax, which is something that they would regularly do just to provide for the temple in whatever practical means. And both of these things were legitimate parts of their religious life. But because they were coming from a distance, these things could be deeply exploited. And that is what gets to the heart of the issue. Because the priests had the ability to decide which animals were acceptable. So as soon as they say what's acceptable or not, they would form the need for someone to have to buy a sacrificial animal. If you're coming from a distance, you couldn't bring necessarily your sacrifice. You'd have to what? Bring money and then purchase it there when you kind of reached Jerusalem. So there was the ability for them to deeply exploit it by allowing those that were selling it to kind of make these huge profits, and then potentially the priests themselves would be in on that. The other thing they would have to do is pay this temple tax. And that temple tax was relatively small, but it could only be paid in a certain currency. Some say it was like a temple currency, some say it was more of a local currency. Some would note that most of the currencies from all these other regions, and there were many, all of them had images on them, and so they wouldn't be accepted because that was considered a graven image of the rulers, so you had to kind of exchange it. Well, the exchange rate that was being used was that which was exploiting the people. So Jesus sees right into this, that something legitimate was turning into something very illegitimate. But more than that, it's where they were doing it. The temple itself, the most massive part of it was the outside court, which is the court of the Gentiles. And the court of the Gentiles was there because what was the very purpose of Israel itself? To bless the whole world. So the whole point was they as a people were to be the ones who created a connection with God, that God would reveal himself to, but the whole world would eventually be blessed and be able to come and partake of. So the outer court is where the Gentiles, those who were non-Jewish, could come and partake. And that is the area, this huge area, estimated to be about 14 acres. I mean, enormous. And that whole area had turned into like a state fair. It was very much now turned into this robust place of businesses and advertising and selling and exchanging. You can kind of imagine it. There was nothing there that really allowed space for anyone now to come and be served by the purpose of the temple. And so Jesus comes to this, and you can imagine what maybe he saw and how it struck him. And many note that this was not the first time Jesus had come to Jerusalem and seen this. We know he was there as a child, but we also know that he probably came quite regularly as part of the festivals and the feasts that took place. And over all of those years, the deep sense of grief that he felt when he saw this, and it was growing. But the Father had not said it's your time to confront this, but it's growing. And now he had just been anointed to fulfill what he had come to bear as the Messiah, to come to do and set things right. And so this time when he comes, it's very, very different. This time when it comes, he is going to take up and speak into what is not right and set it right. And so he comes, and he comes in full force. And it says Jesus made a whip from some ropes and chased them all out of the temple. He drove out the sheep and cattle, scattered the money changers' coins over the floor, and turned over their tables. Then going over to the people who sold doves, he told them, "Get these things out of here. Stop turning my Father's house into a marketplace." So he suddenly appears in the temple, and when he comes into those outer courts, you can imagine with all the intensity, this is a very physical act. There's a real physical force to what he's doing. He is turning tables over. You can imagine coins flying everywhere. He's not only turning the tables over, he is turning the tables on the religious leaders themselves, because they have this whole thing that they've been working, and all of a sudden he's turning the tables on them, and he's putting it right in front of them, and he's forcing them to be confronted by what is so grievous. And what is he ultimately doing in this? Well, I think it could be surmised to say that he's confronting really the ultimate corruption. And the ultimate corruption is using God for our self-interests. The ultimate sense of just desecrating something is when you take what it is and you bring it down and you try to use it for your own purposes, especially when that is God. So he's confronting this idea of using God's provision for this personal gain and this personal profit, if you will, and power. And I think as we look at that, we'd love to say, gosh, what a dramatic scene. Glad to know that would never happen again, right? People would never abuse, religious practices like that, Wouldn't we all love to say that that was just something of the past? But the truth is, it resonates all too much, I'm afraid. Because if one kind of sees that, the church in a way is maybe akin to the temple then, so therefore, as we look at modern times, we would say, in a way, then pastors of churches could use religion for profit and power? Is that possible? Yeah. Leaders of Christian ministries could use religion, if you want to use that, meaning all the things that are connected to religion and people's feelings and passions and devotions and affections and fears, for personal gain. If that's something that you kind of go, yeah, I think I'm a little wary of that. Be wary. Be wary. It's real. It's very real. And it's not to breed any sense of like distrust. It's just to call out and identify that it is there. And it's the ultimate corruption if we're willing to look at it and be honest and real about it. To take what is meant to be good and of God and use it for one's ends. And if you find that there's a part of you that goes, yeah, I don't know if I trust you, Brad, I would say, don't totally trust me. Don't ever. I don't even totally trust myself. I don't. And that's why I say that, not to breed a sense that I think something's worse. It's to say that I take this real seriously. I think there really is something. I think we're also a community who really does ask the right questions. We press into all sorts. We turn over lots of questions. What's an appropriate, compensation? What's an appropriate expectations of people who work? What's appropriate in terms of what the choices we make? Are they serving us or are they serving the good of the people? A few weeks ago, we prayed over somebody becoming an elder here. You might remember Michael Tang. And when I prayed over him the very thing that I had put before him in our process and conversations, and then prayed over him, which is that he would assume that he has a responsibility to serve the common good, your good, God's purposes in your lives over and against his own personal gain. Because that is the essence of what we have to check in ourselves. That is the essence of it. And so it's natural that we have those fears, and we need to guard those fears all the time in terms of the institution. But what I also think we need to be careful of is that people will say, yeah, that's why I don't trust institutional religion. I don't trust, religion and when it has an institution connected to it. The institution isn't the thing to fear. It's the heart of man. It's the heart of people. It's people's ability to use it. Institutions just give a wider scope of what you can exploit. But the truth is, Jesus is not merely confronting the institution or even the religious leaders. He's confronting all of us. He's confronting that which in us begins to use God for our ends, begins to bring down God and reduce him to what serves us. And that isn't limited merely to those who might have a certain profit or power. It can run through all of us. What he's confronting is the sin of seeking our gain more than his glory. And this becomes so clear when you understand and we think that the temple, while it existed then, has, of course, changed. And this is what Jesus alludes to at the end. The temple was that which was created as a way for people to meet with God, understanding that they did not have a means to meet on their own basis. There needed to be a sober humility that they had, as humans have, tried to be like God and separated themselves. So the temple was the meeting place which through sacrifices they could come and have some sense of meeting with God. Kind of an unresolved relationship, but there was a sense of soberness about it. But Jesus comes to be the final sacrifice, as we're going to see, and with that to pour out his Spirit into all who welcome him to live in them. So the scriptures, when we ask the question, what is the temple today? How does this relate to us? Many would say, well, it's the church. No, it's not. Not in the sense of the building. No, it's the church only in the sense that in a spiritual sense, it's a community of people in whom the Spirit lives in us, and we are the temple. Each of us individually, potentially, if Christ lives in us, become that temple. And this is what the scriptures say. In 1 Corinthians 3, it says, don't you know that you yourselves now are God's temple and that God's Spirit lives in you? So when Jesus comes to the temple and he's restoring it to its proper purpose and says, hey, this is to be a place where God dwells and God is honored rightfully, what does he do now? He comes to us as temples, and he is challenging and trying to confront us into that. And that is what we do well, to say, okay, if I am the temple, I need you, God, to challenge me, to help refine me, to confront and cleanse this type of corruption of who's serving who in me. And I think it is so fitting that we do so as we go into this Lenten season, where we're preparing ourselves to properly really engage Jesus, who gave himself in his life and his resurrection. And really, what is the culmination of Jesus in that? What is the culminating moment that we're joining him in? I would suggest it's the moment in which Jesus says, not my will, but yours be done. That is the essence of what Jesus did that allowed him to represent God, bringing the sacrifice we could never bring. God's perfect sacrifice had to come and say, not my desire from a human point of view and a human experience, but completely submitted to God in heaven, in the heavenly eternal desire and will. And this is why we read where Jesus said, Father, he said, if you will, take this cup of suffering away from me. The night before he goes to be crucified, but not my will, however, but yours be done. That is what we're invited to bring ourselves and prepare ourselves for, is to say, Jesus, you did that in a way only you could, but now I want to join you in having that power and becoming that kind of temple on this earth. And this is what Jesus is inviting us to move for and to become more like. When the disciples are saying, gosh, how can we be more like you? Well, that prayer thing, when you pray, that seems to be a big part of how you live. So teach us to pray, and that's where Jesus gives what we know as the Lord's Prayer. And it's really about how do you align your life with God. And Jesus says, all right, let me give you an idea. Our Father, who art in heaven, there is one separate from us. Hallowed be thy name. Let your name be holy and distinct from me, one that I don't desecrate by bringing your name and nature down to my nature and manipulating it and projecting my nature onto you. Keep it holy and distinct. How does that happen? Your will be done as it's in heaven, on earth, not mine. And that is a profound part of what we need to confront in ourselves, is how do we align more with that? Because what Jesus was confronting in this temple was just the opposite. They were saying, how can we use you and bring you down and make you serve our needs? Because there's some profit and gain in this. And so it is that they begin to confront that. And what we need to understand is that the holiness of God, that when we think of hallowed be your name and the whole idea of holiness, it really means that we honor God as God, nothing less, not desecrated down to our ideas. And I think that's helpful because for many of us, when we think of the word holiness, it's kind of a weird one. I don't know about you, but whenever I hear someone, shout, be holy, I'm like, it's a little freaky for me, What do they mean? They're laying a guilt trip. I'm not even sure. I feel bad, like I'm not holy, but I'm not even sure why. It just kind of carries this weird idea to it, like I never feel holy enough, but I'm not even sure what I'm supposed to do. Anybody else feel that way? Holiness is about this very issue. It's about reality. It's not about a religious sentiment. It's about aligning your life with reality. You are not God, he is. It's not about your will, it's about him. That is what reflects holiness. And that is what Jesus is coming to deal with. The true nature of holiness is not religious sentiment, but about reality, about honoring God's true nature. And the God-given, that is the sacred purpose of every aspect of life. That is why holiness does relate to how we treat other people. Do we treat them the way that they should be treated because of God's sacred purpose for them? Do we treat money the way we should treat money? Because it's not a bad thing. It has a holy purpose, a sacred purpose. Do we treat our bodies, sexual intimacy, we could go, words, everything? Do we treat it right? Because if you treat it right, it's aligned with reality. And that is what he's getting to. And this is where we get confronted with this whole idea of the way we tend to think about things. Because we tend to relate to God as kind of like we're the subject and he's the object. And we get to manipulate him. That's why we speak about, hey, how do you prefer God to be? Well, I prefer a God who is. And we begin to speak as if God is reduced to what? Our preferences. And that is not what it means to know God or to keep him holy. See, the reality of God is a little closer and akin to gravity. You can say, this is how I feel about gravity. It won't matter what you feel about gravity. It exists. Whether you believe it or not, it exists. And the consequences will always be there. It is bigger than you, it is more definitive than you, and it's not going to be kept relative to how you feel about it or what you like about gravity. It is. It'd be like saying that, there's a road that's been created and it's curved, but I don't like driving curves. I like driving straight. So I'm just going to drive straight. You can do so, but the reality is we have to conform to the road. The road is not going to conform to you. And that is the reality of what is being confronted here, is they're trying to bring down God and make him under their own use. And the truth is that Christianity cannot become something we make up or any idea about God. It is truth, and truth is that which disrupts our lives. It challenges our lives. We're to form our lives around what is real. And so to be holy is really to become whole because we're aligning ourselves with reality. True holiness is really true wholeness. And the only ultimate wholeness, because the person who's truly holy is truly whole. That is, they're aligned with reality. And that can help us when we think that holiness is about becoming fanatical or passionate or how we express things. No, it's ultimately about becoming whole. It's about becoming clear. It's about living life in relationship to the way things really are. And what Jesus is confronting most and where things get corrupted is when we begin to use God. At the end of the day, St. Augustine once said that good people will be those who use the world to glorify God. Bad people are those who use God to glorify themselves. And that's the challenge. Or to put it this way, we either try to use God and become evil in 1,000 subtle ways, or we allow God to use us and become increasingly good and true in countless ways. And that's the essence, I think, of what Jesus is seeking to work out with the system then and within our own sense of temples. And it's helpful to see that there was a legitimacy to what they were doing. It was very they could easily have justified, like, hey, well, people need this, I mean, hey, everybody needs to get their sacrifices. Everybody has to exchange money. So we're not doing anything that people don't want, that isn't normal. We have to be as honest and say there's a lot of things that might become normal and acceptable, but we have to be willing to kind of let Jesus confront even those elements within us. And so it is that the issue of reducing God to serve our own interests is not really only a matter of obvious religious frauds. It reaches deeply into our hearts, much more than I think sometimes we are totally aware of. But my guess is most of us can understand that there are times where we say, I want to pursue God as God. I want to honor him. I want to worship him, make him the great worth of life and his supremacy, his sovereignty. But if we're honest, we also have a lot of our own self-interest that do play into that. And we need to ask ourselves, do I come to worship to really honor God in that way? Or do I also realize that I have allowed my own personal preferences that are natural in themselves, again, legitimate. It's okay to like this or that, but we can really, at the heart of things, be using God. We might come and say, well, I really like that worship leader. I really like that song so much more than this other song. I love it when the worship is this way or that way. Now, those can be natural preferences, but do you hear in that the problem? Suddenly, worship is about how it makes me feel, what my preference for style is. Again, natural at one level, but you start to realize that the temple is not being the temple. I am not serving the proper purpose of my life if it's now suddenly being about me using God to serve myself. The temple is not centered, it's losing its center. And it's allowing things into our own temple that really don't belong there, that we have to confront, like the strength of our own wants and wills and preferences and just it getting reduced down to how we feel. Or maybe we come with our own means of profit. Hopefully not to come and to try to make a financial profit about coming around God's community, although that could happen, and we put boundaries on that. But even the profit of attention. Maybe we come and say, you know what, I really like to go worship God, but I can't handle it when I don't get the attention that I really want. And that attention is legitimate. Wanting attention from people is legitimate. But what if it becomes where we define it being good or bad depending on how much attention we got? Do you see the issue there? It's now become reduced to where it's really about, I want God to serve my need or my ends. I don't want him to make me feel bad or feel unaffirmed. And there we start to run into these problems. Or even, I would even challenge those who are coming and maybe you're just seeking God. You're saying, I'm exploring if God's real to me. I have questions. And I love. I think I have the greatest affirmation for those who are willing to come and explore. And you think, I sense God may be real. I mean, I exist and I have a sense that there's something profound about that existence and something transcendent. So I'm very open to God. Even you in that process need to ask yourself, though, what is going to define the reality of God for you? Is it going to be merely how it fits your will or how it fits reality? Because for many people, the most important question you can ask if you're seeking is, what do I want to find? Because the answer of what you'll find will often just merely be, what do you want? A lot of people say, I'm seeking God. I would say, do you want to find him? Because the answer to that question is really important. Well, I do, as long as he is, and here we go. We kind of need him to conform to as long as he, fits that. And the truth is, there's a point at which we have to confront, if God is God, then I have to confront that I'm not. And I have to submit to that. And that is a reality that we may have to come to terms with. And this is why Jesus seeks to clear away whatever is corrupting us, to restore us to our own wholeness and holiness in this. And we find in this text that this is what he's passionate to do. They're reminded of how, that long ago, God had kind of used the psalmist to kind of describe this one who would come, who would have passion for this. Jesus is passionate for you and I to become whole. This is what he's all about. How long? From eternity past. He has been passionate for you and I. He's consumed for us to become that. Well, yeah, for God's house, the church to be that. No, you're the temple. He is passionate for you. He is, and this is why he wants so much and so deeply to come and say, let's just really clear away that which is you're going to miss who you really are if you kind of reduce it down to your wants and your wills and your feelings. There's more here. And he's really confronting them in that. And this is why when they then come to him and they say, well, how do you have authority to do this? because, hey, you are really confronting our whole system. And Jesus is, you can almost picture what he's thinking, you don't have authority to do this. What you're doing, I am the one coming to bear this authority. And he claims, I will be, he says, destroy this temple and it will be raised up in 3 days. And they're thinking, what are you talking about? This was the rebuilding of the temple and had been going on for about 60, 65 years at this point. It had been built long before, but they're now under King Herod rebuilding it. It wasn't even going to be finished until about 64 AD. And then it was destroyed shortly after. So this temple was this massive project, and they're looking and going, are you kidding? We're underway trying to build this temple, and we love the way it works for us, so don't mess with it. And Jesus is like, you don't understand. It never was an end in itself. The temple was merely a way for you to understand and begin to know that you can meet with God based on sacrifices and based on knowing your position. But I am going to embody what the temple is. I'm going to become the final sacrifice, the place in which humanity can meet with God. And that's why Jesus knew what was coming. And he began to know something, that he would rise again and defeat the power of separation and of death itself. And so Jesus tells them of this. And it's interesting that as this echoes, it is actually echoing the very thing in which the prophets had spoken of before, that God was going to send a messenger, and you can read in Malachi, and that messenger would come, and he would clear things away, and he would be the Lord himself coming as a refining fire, that it would be that one could not stand up against. And he would come to his temple, he would come to his people and set things right. And that is exactly what's taking place now in Jesus. And they are stood back by that, they're stepped back. And that is the place of where God wants to come and meet us in that. He is the only provision for us to live right with God. He is the purifier. He's the one who wants to refine us. He's the only one who can make us right and do that work. So what does this say to us? How does it speak to us? For one, he's trying to help us understand that if you and I want to live right with God and become not corrupted, but people who are right, where God is God and we are his people, then we got to realize that we're not going to do it by our own sacrifices, our own rituals. It's only he who's going to be able to fully meet that. And so he becomes uncomfortable, of course, because as somebody noted, when do you feel most frustrated by your own potential? When you try hardest to be better. When you and I try to do better, that's when we go, I'm having a hard time with this. If you don't even try to be like better, good, God, whatever you want, if you don't even try to be good as a student, you never feel bad because I'm not even engaged in it. You can believe anything you want about yourself until you actually try. So when Jesus hits the scene, he kind of causes everyone to feel what? Discomfort. That's what confrontation does. Confrontation will always make you feel uncomfortable before it changes you. And this is what he's bringing to bear. Somebody, Tim Keller, noticed how in the 20th century, one of the great inventions was the curve, grading on the curve. Everybody liked it. Everybody likes the curve because it gives you a lot of, I don't have to, I'm just somewhere in the curve, And it makes me feel good because there's always someone, worse than me. And it works really well until there's that one jerk who breaks the whole curve and messes it up. That one student who just totally throws it off just when you felt safe. Somebody shows up and you suddenly aren't in the position you're in. The truth is, there's a lot of people in churches that are very cranky because they are trying so hard to be good and don't realize that now they're faced with their faults or limitations. They feel smaller and worse. That's why churches get a lot of people who feel all uptight, because we haven't really come to terms with the fact that he is the only means. And to live right is to invite him and let him meet us in that place. And when he does, he is that refiner of our lives. And that's exactly the term that God said he would have. He'd be like a refiner's fire. What happens in a refiner's fire? You get things heated up, it's uncomfortable, and in the heat, it separates out what's corrupted. It separates out the impurities, and none of us like that. I don't. But in the end, it's the realization that it's a chance to become more who I really was meant to be. That whatever was lost was a malignant cancer in the first place. It wasn't really what I was meant to be. So if I'm dealing with hate, deception, addictions, exploitation in me, if I'm selfish, all of that is not what I want in me anyways, and it's not my truest self in God's point. So he's coming after trying to clear that away. And that's our call, that's our invitation, that's our opportunity, is to say, Jesus, do we welcome you into the temple, or do we reject you and say, get out? But his confrontation to you and I is, who is serving who? Is God going to be the one whom you say, I'm going to pursue him, and I want to acknowledge him, and I guess I kind of want to worship and honor him to the degree that it meets my, my attention, my feeling good, some kind of profit, or I'm coming because God is God and I'm not. And sometimes it won't feel good, and sometimes I'll be disappointed by people, and that's okay, and I need to deal with that. But it's not about that. It's about God. And that's really when I become my most right, my most true, is when I understand that it's about him. Let's pray. God, we are much like those to whom you come even now by your Spirit, and you're showing up to the crazy, wild activity of our own lives, and we stop and say, come and confront us, what is corrupted within us, where it has become about us, that we might come to that powerful, profound place in which we live in this conflicted world with the ability to join you, Jesus, in saying, not our will, but the Father, our Creator's will, the will of heaven be done. And we invite your Spirit just to show us where we have not honored your true holiness, where we have kind of desecrated you by bringing you down merely to our needs. Legitimate as they may be, we have reduced you down to those. And I know I believe here, there are some who know that the idea of being the temple, to becoming the temple, is one that you realize but have not entered into yet, because you've looked at Jesus and you realize you have not really invited him to come and to live within you as the sacrifice who sets you right, who overcomes all your sin and separation and gives you freedom and then leads your life. And I invite you even now, if you desire for him to be that, you can just simply join in your own heart, in your own mind, something of this prayer. Jesus, I want to be reconciled and right, and I invite you to come and to live within me. And I receive your sacrifice. Your death on the cross is that which took on all of what I could never provide for. You took the consequences of my separation. You took the shame. And I receive your forgiveness that you've said you extend to me now, to be forgiven and now to be led by you. And I pray that you would lead me. And together we say, may it not be about us, but be about you. come and restore us to your true purpose. I invite us to stand and continue prayerfully in worship. Let's worship together.
Thank you for listening to the official broadcast of the Westside Vineyard in Los Angeles. Tune in for next week's message.